Welcome to the Hidden Bookcase. Come in, have a seat, get comfy.
It's just next to the sliding library ladder and right below the shelf titled High Fantasy.
Pick a book, your favourite book. That's the one that opens this room. Inside you'll find a warm fire, a loving cat, and a skylight beneath the stars.
And a really towering to be read pile.
I'm Morgan, I use they them pronouns, and I am the homoerotic subtext of making potions together.
I'm Sorren, I use he him pronouns, and I am an overexhausted horse.
We've been friends for 10 years and are always swapping books.
But despite having the same taste in books, we never get round to reading each other's recommendations. It's always just another book on the pile.
It's a seriously big pile now. It might crush me in my sleep. So each month we're going to force each other to read a book.
The new reader will give a blind summary of the book. We'll both go away and read it, and then we'll return to chat about it.
So this week, let's get to talking about
Graceling by Kristin Cashore.
So, Sorren, where did you find this book? What's this book about? Tell me about Graceling.
This book was recommended to me a very long time ago, probably in like 2012 or something, by our dear mutual friend Maria, who we love very much. So Maria was like, read Graceling, and I was like, I trust you with my life. Of course I'll read Graceling. And Graceling is a young adult fantasy novel following Katza, who is in her late teens, and she acts as an enforcer for her uncle, the king, Randa, because she has a grace, which is like a supernatural talent, or a superpower pretty much, which is centered on killing. The story kicks off with a rescue attempt. Katza is trying to free the father of one of the foreign nation's queens who has been abducted, but there's more to that crime than first appears.
Mysterious. Shall we listen to my thoughts from a week ago?
We should absolutely listen to your blind reaction.
Okay, so right off the bat, I'm going to be honest, I know absolutely nothing about Graceling. I know that it was one of those very popular YA fantasy books that everyone read when I was a teenager, except I was busy watching TV shows. I know I keep getting confused with that Wattpad story, A Touch of Poison. I don't actually know what that's about, but I feel like individual unique gifts is a thing they have in common. I haven't read either of them, but like it feels like something that was mentioned in my vicinity at some point. I actually own 2 copies of Graceling. The copy I have with me is very pretty. It's the new one. I found it in a charity shop. And it's got a rose and a dagger, and I think it's more just vibey than actually helpful in telling me what this book is about. The other copy is like the traditional copy, but I have lent that to Sorren. So, and that has like a woman on the cover with swords, I believe, which again, very generic fantasy. I know it's high fantasy because that's like the week we're doing. As I was about to record this, my flatmate ran past and went, I liked it, but Bitter Blue was better. So that means nothing to me, but I feel like it's important to say. But yeah, I'm very excited to read this quintessential YA novel that I have managed to avoid for so long. And yeah. Interesting. I basically said nothing about the book there, but we love that for me. I do feel like the cover doesn't give that much away about the plot.
No.
Or this cover, definitely.
That's what, a sword with a what does that mean? Where's the rose come from?
It's so pretty though, Sorren.
It is very pretty. I will say, I don't like the old cover.
It's very 2008.
Katza's armor, she seems to be on the mountain in this, there's snow, but her arms are just out. She's gonna freeze. Like, even Katza is gonna freeze. We've established this. And also, if you're on the mountain pass, her hair is still long. She should have cut it by then.
Yeah. Disappointing, but very 2008.
But the American covers.
Oh.
Right, and it has her eyes, and the art style's so pretty. I'm just obsessed with that.
God, I want the American covers now.
I know, I want them too.
But I just bought the entire series in the new covers, so we're not doing that. Yeah, I managed to avoid this book for so long because I just avoided so much YA female protagonist fantasy because I was just like, yeah, it's going to be really straight and boring. And like, yeah, it's a little bit straight, but I was pleasantly surprised by this book. I'm going to be perfectly honest. I need to trust you more. I remember being like, why are Sorren and Maria so obsessed with this? It's just another YA fantasy book. And now I've read it and I'm like, okay, it does actually break the mold quite a lot.
Blurb-wise, it feels like it could easily be exactly like every other fantasy book. It doesn't give it away. But also, especially for when it was written, 2008. And also, okay, I do have to say, I was bringing this in being like, yes, there's explicitly queer characters in this. Patently there aren't. They are later. And I assume it's because it was a debut and 2008.
But they were pretty obvious. If they're the characters I'm thinking about.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
Thanks to your intro in this episode, I know that you were picking up on what they were putting down. And there's more queer characters later.
That's good.
And I couldn't remember when people were introduced. It had been a while. And in Fire, with the high fantasy thing, Fire is a bit higher in the magic. And I couldn't remember how much magic there was in Graceling. Graceling almost reads like low fantasy.
Yeah.
So I've messed it up on the brief.
But also, I think that even the quote-unquote straight characters give off queer energy.
I remember even the first time I read this, I was originally reading Katsa as Ace.
Yeah. I was definitely getting, like, Demi vibes from her. And even from Poe. I was getting, like, bi vibes from Poe quite a lot.
Oh, absolutely. He's too well written to be straight. But also, I think their relationship doesn't feel very heterosexual. At the end, they kind of imply that they're not exclusive, which is interesting. And also, I was shocked to realise that this old cover has this exquisitely drawn romance will slake the thirst of Twilight fans on it.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? What? Because
I'm sorry.
Where are the Twilight vibes? Quite frankly, I've read Twilight, unfortunately. I don't see any commonality, apart from, I guess, Edward reads people's minds, but even specifically, Edward doesn't read Bella's mind, whereas Poe can read. But in Twilight, there's so much more dubious consent. Edward finds a lot of ways to cross Bella's boundaries despite not being able to read her mind. But with these two,
this is like consent. This is like supplication. I mean, it's 2008. Of course, everyone's comparing everything to Twilight, but like,
yeah, maybe that's it.
Come on, people. Come on. But yes, I was very pleasantly surprised. This is the second time because when I started reading Cruel Prince, I was like, oh, this is just another generic YA fantasy. And then was like, oh, it's different.
It does handle similar themes in terms of female rage and skewed power dynamics and patriarchal oppression and violence. God, did not remember how prominent a theme that was, particularly with Bitter Blue and with Blair. Was a bit freaked out, actually. Maybe it went over my head a little bit the first time.
Yeah, when I first started reading this book, I was like, oh no, there's only one female character and all the rest are men, and yet it's quote-unquote feminist. And the more we got in, the more I was like, oh no, we're actually going to explore the fact that everyone around her in her life is men. And like, this is a problem. Even though they all like quote-unquote have her best interest at heart, they're all in one way or another about controlling her. Even the ones that claim that they're like on her side.
Yeah, precisely. Like Giddens' romantic inclinations for Cats are very controlling. I had the exact same thought process as you, though. Even on the reread, wondering where are all the women, and then as they got reintroduced, I was remembering them, like Helda, who's arguably the most positive influence in Katsa's life. I feel like Graceling really neatly subverts the trope of the only girl on the team. Katsa not being able to connect with other women has been traumatic for her, and it's deliberately something that Randa has denied to her to isolate her and make him more reliant on her for approval and for safety.
There's a lot of subverting those tropes. You know, there's the whole love at first sight kind of thing, but for this, it's like actually there's a reason behind it because no one will look her in the eye because they hate her eyes. So Poe looking her in the eye is so electrifying. Or like the protagonist cuts off their hair scene, but like she actually properly, it's not just like a little bob that's still like kind of femme. It's like, nope, she's getting it all off.
I've seen a lot of people headcanon her as some flavour of non-binary.
I feel like Poe and Katsa is he, they, she, they solidarity.
You're so right, actually.
That's what it's giving.
Absolutely. I do like that they make Poe much vainer of the two of them. I just think it's funny.
I do love him. I love him.
As a love interest. Also having a love interest who is a disabled man of colour in 2008. But he's just so good as well. Like, he's so funny.
Yeah.
And I just love him.
The only way this romance could have worked was if he'd gone so far in the opposite direction of every other man in her life, which is what he does. But then to top it all off, him being like, this is how it should be, and not treating it as if he's doing something special, that was like, it takes me a lot to come round on heterosexual romances, especially in YA. But like the way he was so respectful of her boundaries, they're both so traumatized. He's very explicitly about the consent and about giving her as much as he can in order to make her feel comfortable enough to give whatever she feels comfortable to.
The scenes after she finds out about the fact that he can read minds, where he's then like, how do you want me to approach this? Like, I will just tell you everything that I think about you if that's what makes you feel better. The emphasis on her comfort in every situation.
Specifically the scene where she's like, what if I gave consent and then took it away? And he's like, that's your right. You can take it away whenever you want. Yeah. That was so important. That is very rarely explored. And especially in 2008, like...
Yeah, it's wild. Choosing this to reread it, I was like, I remember loving Katsa and Poe, and am I still gonna love them? Because, but I was like, I'm falling in love with you guys again. You guys are great.
I do think this says a little something about your heterosexual relationship dynamic choices.
Yeah,
I literally had to write in the scene where it's revealed that giving her his ring means that he's given her everything. And then I just wrote next to it, Percy DeRollo energy.
I had never made that connection.
Within a short amount of time of meeting said love interest, giving away your entire wealth and estate.
It's just the correct thing to do.
I agree.
I do love how unambitious he is, though. And I like that they align on that they are so uninterested in power.
Yeah. The scene where he's describing his home, and I was like, this is forever home energy, the end goal for the series. And that the tragedy is well handled. That's like the one thing he wants in life is like a good view.
Hose blindness, knowing that it was going to happen, was very stressful. Because they kept foreshadowing it. But I feel like they did such a good job with it, even though it's actually not that much time dedicated to it at the end of the book. Him having to grieve that loss. I just think that it was very sensitively handled. Poe even being like, I feel like I'm being first world problems about this because I have my grace, which allows me to sense my surroundings, and therefore I haven't had the loss that another person in my position would have had. And Katz is like, that's the only stupid thing you've said so far.
Yes. Actually following through in a YA book on an injury having realistic consequences.
That's true, that's rare enough.
Yeah, usually you just get the whole like, oh, they were bleeding out, oh, they got hit really bad in the head. They're fine now, it's a couple days later, don't even have a scar. This was like, no, he suffered very severe head trauma. That's going to do something. Actually exploring that. I don't know if it comes up later in the books, but I'm hoping.
So I have a question. What did you think of the writing style?
I really liked it. There are a couple phrases that I can't remember what now, but there were a couple phrases I was like, that is very specifically 2008 writing language. But overall, the writing style I thought worked really well. I can't put my finger on what it was, but there was something about the sentence structure that just carried me along. There was a lot of refrain used. The way it was in Katz's head with short sentences and listing. It was just something that really tickled my writing brain and was like, this is good. And I read this in like an afternoon.
Did you? Well,
I had a day off and I was maybe 50 pages in because I had been reading on my work shift. And so I just sat in my bed and I drank about 4 litres of tea and I finished it in an afternoon, which has not happened to me with a book in a long time. A lot of that was the writing style because it just carries the narrative really well. And even though a lot of this is just travel scenes, which, you know, is a comparison to Priory because it did feel like this was a very big world because there was a lot of traveling. But even though this is a lot of just travel scenes, I was never bored because there was a lot of character work going on in the background. And the way that Katza looked at the world and the way that she was reevaluating everything in her head at all times. Just that inner exploration all the time.
Yeah, I couldn't really remember it, and then I was surprised by it. Initially, I was like, wow, this is like kind of sparse and a bit strange. But then I was like, oh, this is kind of just Katz's voice. The way that she thinks is also the way that she talks. And the way that she processes is quite unusual. Speaking of which, I've actually was like, and then I googled it and I was like, a lot of people seem to headcanon Katza as autistic, and I was like, I can see that.
Right, yes. That was what it was giving, like the whole book. I was like, this is autistic coded.
The way that she analyzes relationships and even analyzes what she's doing, the amount of thought she puts into eye contact.
The scene when she's thinking about Poe and she's like, I don't know how to read social cues. And he doesn't have to read social cues because he can read them in other people. So he always tells me what he's thinking so that I don't have to read the social cues. And he always knows what I'm thinking so I don't have to tell him. I was like,
match made in heaven.
This is perfect. That was the scene where I was like, I'm picking up what you're putting down. I also love the way there's like multiple times when she's like talking to somebody and it's said that she talks into an inanimate object while she's like talking to them. And that's such a visual thing I can see of her, like when she's like talking to Helda, but she's staring at a handful of bubbles in the bath.
I love her so much. I forgot how much I loved her. She could so easily, because of the whole my grace is killing thing, which also a fun subversion. I love that she finds out that that's not what it is. So nicely tied to the themes of the book, so beautifully done. But she could so easily be so edgy because she's like tortured people and murdered people, and also she does feel guilty about it. It would be so easy for her to like be really angsty about that, which again, a reasonable thing to angst about. I'm not saying that it wouldn't be, but she's so kind. I mean, the fact that she started the council and stuff, that, you know, happened prior to the book, so she already has that in herself. But just little scenes, like the scene early on where the tavern keeper's daughter is looking at her eyes and she's like, hi, my name's Katza, and then she gets her off and everyone like makes fun of her. But she just wants to like reach out and connect with this child. It's so cute. She has the best of intentions, but it makes her tragedy so poignant.
She just wants to care and cares so much, but then she doesn't perceive herself as having the capacity to care, which is so heartbreaking. But she is such like an open heart. It's just that she's had to close it off so she doesn't even perceive it herself, which is just, it's so good. So good. Speaking of the realization of her grace, I'm going to admit, when I started this book, I suddenly realized that I had seen a Tumblr post about 5 years ago that was like, oh yeah, when Katza finds out what her real grace is later on. So I knew her grace wasn't killing. And the number of times where she just puts herself to bed, I was like, this wouldn't be included if it wasn't important, especially since it's included in like little micro paragraph. I theorized that her power was bodily control over herself.
I like that though. That's cool. Yeah.
But I love that her grace is survival, especially in this world and in the vibe of the feminist theme. It fits so perfectly.
The fact that everyone immediately jumped to it being killing, but she was attacked in the first place. That everyone, you fed her this other narrative where she was blamed, victim blaming, which is kind of what the whole book's about. But it's survival and it's so thematically satisfying. I love it so much.
Yes.
But also Poe faking his grace as being something else. I just like that they're all not what they appear to be. But I will say, like having a grace, even as a kid, I was like, he's got one eye.
Yeah, like, I'm sorry, he's got an eye patch and everybody loves him. Like, come on, people, pick it up. I wrote in my book, I was like, he's got charm person or something like that. I mean, it's more than that. He's got like manipulating, reality bending, perception bending.
Lex power is very interesting. Also, random connection to a different piece of media again. But Damien from the Bright Sessions.
We're really on a theme with that because we've got Damien, we've got Lek, and we've got Alison from the Umbrella Academy. And also there's the Purple Man from Jessica Jones.
Kilgrave.
Seeing how multiple different characters in multiple different contexts have used a power that is so similar is very interesting to me. Because so many different authors handle it so differently. Most of the time it is just like, this is a villain power. But then you get more nuanced explorations like with Alison and with Damien.
I do like that they take the time to discuss it. There is a conversation in the book where they say, why does he do this? Because anyone has the capacity to hurt other people. I think it's Poe talking to Katza, and Katza's like, I hadn't really thought of it. And then they're just like, I guess this was just unlucky. Somebody could have this power, but he's the wrong kind of man to have this power.
Yeah, it's another exploration on a different wavelength of consent and of bodily autonomy.
And Poe's powers aren't that similar at all, but the fact that he knows what everyone thinks of him makes it very easy to manipulate the people around him. Because he can just modify what he's saying or what he's doing to change their opinion of him. But he doesn't use it for ill, which I think is another nice parallel.
Yes. I did love her having to put her entire trust in him because being able to trust him that way.
Yeah, because he'd earned it by that point.
Exactly. It was so interesting. Like, I knew what was going to happen, that like Poe was going to be able to counter it. But the way that it was done, where even people who aren't Lek can push forward the narrative.
That was very clever, actually. I liked that a lot. And I think that also ties really nicely into this victim blamey theme. The story has so much power. So as that idea gets perpetuated in the same way that the story about Katza as a cold-blooded killer got perpetuated, the story about Lek as a good man, a kind man, got perpetuated.
I think it's another subversion of typical YA tropes of like, look at this really, really capable female main character who for some reason has to rely on this less capable main male character when it makes no narrative sense. Whereas there is a reason for this. Yeah. And it's not just because I want to see the like role reversal, which is actually just upholding the patriarchy. It actually makes sense narratively. And then it gets turned back on its head. And I really liked that a lot.
The resolution of it being Katza's desire to protect Poe, as in protect his secret, that then snaps her out of it.
Yes. That being the thing that pushes her over the edge, the absolute urge and knowledge that she can't let those words be said because she has to protect Poe. Oh, my heart.
Morgan, he was your favourite character.
It's so hard, Sorren. It's so hard.
That's a good problem to have, right?
I love Katza and I love Poe. I love them equally. I love them for different reasons. I love everything about them. We all know I love a good female rage. And I also love a man who drinks his respect woman juice. These are my two archetypes of character. And then you got Raffen on the side just being a nerd, and I'm like, that's also my type. But I don't know enough about you because you're not in this book enough. What about you?
I'm very torn. It's between Katza and Bitterblue.
Ooh.
Bitterblue doesn't get to do all of her stuff in this book. Some of the reasons that I love Bitterblue aren't here. It almost feels like cheating to say Bitterblue because she has so much development. But I just love Katza. She's so righteously angry. Her little scheme to start training all of the girls in the kingdoms in self-defense. She's just such a good person. But I love how weird and awkward she is as well. It's just such a fun balance. Like, she just cannot socialise at all.
One of my favourite things about her, I think, is one of those characters who forgets that they're allowed to be sad about their own trauma.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, I have to solve everyone else's problems and my trauma is just there because I'm weird, and people taking the time to be like, no, it's there because you were abused and you are allowed to mourn that.
There's such a hopeful to the whole book. Yeah, like Casa has done a lot of terrible things. We don't really get to ruminate on them, which I think works for the tone. But that little scene where she's talking about all of the terrible things she's done, and then Poe says, well, you have the rest of your life to do good things. We love a redemption arc, and it's rare that the protagonist is the one going through it, I think.
It's softly hopeful, like especially the ending felt very much like the ending of a series. It's not like, oh, we're happily ever after. It's like, now we get to find out who we are, and we get to do that together, potentially. You know, the scene where they're just in the cave and like he's describing the cave.
The subversion of it was so beautiful. With the couple, I think it's always lovely to see when they have so much of a good influence on each other. With Katza and Poe, it's so palpable that they make each other so much better and they give each other so much hope. But yeah, that feeling of leaving them alone to continue to do their thing, to butcher the quote from The Starless Sea, good stories feel like they're still going on somewhere in story space. And I also, parallel to Priory, I like that they split up at the end, even though they have that plan to meet again.
I feel like it's such a mature thing to see in a YA book, especially.
Yeah, and then Katza's insistence that she never wants to get married. So many other YA books would have said, oh, but it's not when it's him. Or it would have been that thing of, oh, it's only because the understanding of marriage she has is so informed by this horrific patriarchy that she lives in. But marriage can be something else, which is okay as a message, but the narrative completely respects that's never something that's going to change for her. Poe completely respects that. I love that a lot.
I just want to consume this book. I want to inject it directly into my veins. Speaking of world lore, great segue, I am obsessed with the naming convention of cities. It's not something I've seen ever done like this before, and I'm obsessed with it.
It's so easy to remember where everyone and everything is.
They're nice, simple names that I don't have to think about too much. I'm just like, Monsey, it's by the sea.
Yeah, the one thing that I will say, I don't feel like I have a very clear sense of the kingdoms being different to one another, apart from maybe geographically. And I guess maybe that's supposed to imply that they have a very similar culture, because we do see a little bit more of other places later in the series.
Yeah, the only culture that feels like properly fleshed out is the Leonid culture, because you have, you know, the rings, and you have the fact that they all wear gold in their ears, very distinct markers, whereas everyone else is just kind of like generic European fantasy world that's a little bit homogenous.
Yeah.
I've found a quote that's a good encapsulation of the writing style, I think. Giddon's angry eyes grew warm again. He reached out and shook Poe's hand. You understand my concern, Giddon said. Of course. Katza looked from one of them to the other, the two of them shaking hands, understanding each other's concern. She didn't see where Giddon came off feeling insulted. She didn't see how Giddon had any place in it at all. Who were they to take her fight away from her and turn it into some sort of understanding between themselves? He should have taken more care of her face. She would knock his nose from his face. She would thump them both, and she would apologize to neither. I think A, it's a very fun quote. B, it encapsulates everything about the narrative and the themes. And C, I am such a sucker for refrain when you repeat the sentence but you change it and you pull it from one character to another and see how they use the same words. I love it so much, and it's done so well and used so often in this book. Another feminist thing made me think of the fact that there's just contraception in this. It's brought up multiple times because it's like actually vaguely important, especially with Katza's like, I will not have children. It's very important to me that like actually thought about that.
This was an interesting one to read, with abortion rights being a discussion.
Like the week after Roe v. Wade. Yes.
Oh, yeah. I forgot how gross Lek was as well. Is that one of those things that went over my head, or did I just forget? I'm not sure. But I do like how it's handled. I think it's done in a very accessible way for YA. It's not skirting around it. It's clear what's being alluded to. But it's not, I want to say, gory. There's no detail, which is not necessary.
No, it made it accessible, but not overtly traumatizing.
Morgan, how did you rate Graceling, and how do you feel about it?
It's a 5 out of 5. I had a good time. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I read it in an afternoon, which gets at least 4 out of 5. It was just interesting, well-rounded, very ahead of its time. Loved it. Will be reading the rest of the series. Yeah, how did you rate it?
See, I feel like I'm going to be controversial here and say it's probably a 4, which sounds mean. I do love this book so much. I think Bitter Blue was definitely my favourite, and I'm like, I wish that we had a bit more political intrigue. I wish that we had a bit more world building, and Bitter Blue has those things, so I've got that point of comparison.
Fair.
Morgan, do you have any recommendations for anybody who likes Graceling?
Absolutely. There is one particular book that as I was reading this, I was comparing it so much, which is A Broken Blade by Melissa Blair. It's got kind of a similar plot, it's about a character who is part of a marginalized part of the world, and she is basically an assassin for the king, enforcing his rule on these people who are like her. And it's basically about her unlearning that. And also she has to like stop being an alcoholic, because she's very severely an alcoholic for most of the book. And also bisexual. And it's also written by a First Nations author. But it's got a lot of the same themes of control and feminist fantasy. Definitely would recommend. What about you?
I was going to recommend A Cruel Prince, which I'm reading right now by Holly Black.
I was going to say, if you want a reverse character arc that you got from Katza, read The Cruel Prince.
Exactly. It's interesting because it touches on a lot of the similar themes of powerlessness. It doesn't really consider or interrogate gender and gender roles in the same way that Graceling does, but the protagonist, rather than, I guess, choosing mercy and kindness, she chooses violence. If you want to see how that goes, A Cruel Prince...
It's The Cruel Prince.
I guess it is just one.
It's a very specific one.
To be fair, there are others, and they're also quite cruel.
Yeah, there's only one that's important.
But The Cruel Prince is about a human girl taken from her home under violent circumstances and then raised alongside her twin sister and her half-fae sister in the fairy realm. And as a human, she's uniquely vulnerable to fae magic, and she's trying to secure a place of power in the fae court so she can be safe.
So next month, we're going to be doing Dark Academia for all of you returning back to school or university, get us in the mood. And I'll be forcing Sorren to read Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. Until then, you're always welcome through the bookcase.
Don't forget to scratch the cat on your way out. Thank you for listening to The Hidden Bookcase, a production of Plain or Prod. On this episode, you heard Morgan Greensmith and Sorren Briarwood discussing Graceling by Kristin Cashore. You can find out more about this book at kristincashore.com. And you can follow Cashore at Kristin Cashore on Twitter. You can find The Hidden Bookcase on Twitter at Hidden Bookcase, and on Instagram, Facebook, Tumblr, and TikTok at Hidden Bookcase Podcast. Find out more about Plain or Prod at plainorprod.com. Know what we should read next, or want to chat to us about what you thought of this episode's read? You can reach us at hiddenbookcase@gmail.com, or send us a DM on social media. We'd love to hear from you. If you're enjoying The Hidden Bookcase, please consider leaving us a rating or review. Or you can always tell a friend how to find us. Your whispers are the best way for bookworms to discover our show. On our next episode, which will be out on Monday, the 12th of September, we'll be discussing Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. We hope to see you then, and in the meantime, you're always welcome through the bookcase.